and welcome to the third episode of the 2020 A131 lecture series. I hope you are safe and well wherever you are in the world, because today we have an amazing guest that will be introduced by Julia in a minute. So Julia and I will be your moderators today. And first, I would like to briefly introduce you again to this year's theme. As you may probably know, and hopefully you took part to it, last year's series Crisis Action, What is the Emergency? Aimed to start a debate on the role that the built environment plays in responding to the social, economic, and political crisis that our society is currently facing. This year's theme, Death and Life of Architecture, is instead focusing on the reinterpretation of these challenges, creating a parallelism between the stages of life and architecture. Because it's not only about analyzing the challenges, but it is also about questioning the way we interpret and tackle them. In what way? To explain that, I have to tell you a little anecdote. So in an Aboriginal school in Australia, there was a painting on the floor symbolizing knowledge, with a child walking and talking along with his grandpa. So to us, that was pretty clear. It is the grandpa passing on knowledge of what he experienced in life to the immature child. But that was actually a very Western way to see it. And for the Wajak Aboriginal community, it was the opposite. The innocence of the child was the symbol of knowledge, because the child was teaching and questioning what his grandpa always took for granted and right as a postulate of society. So our lecture series is trying to do the same, reversing the cycle of life, going from retirement to birth and then death, to question what we usually take for granted and the way we tackle these challenges we are nowadays facing. 7 events: retirement, adulthood, young adult, teenage, childhood, and birth and death, with the aim of switching our perspective from the experienced adult to the pristine child. Today we are going to present our third episode, Young Adult. The first two has seen the presence of Patrick Devlin from Pollard Thomas Edwards Studio and Hilary Vernon Smith for the episode about retirement that discuss how society is changing in regard to the concept of third age and retirement. For adulthood, Dalia Milian Bernal opened the debate on the topic of reclaiming abandoned urban spaces by local population in Central America. These events are going to be available soon on YouTube, so you can check them if you missed them. And I just want to tell you that today's session is going to be recorded and available soon as well. Please mute your mic, and if you want to open your camera, it's more than welcome. And so as last thing, I would like to leave you to Julia and our guest with one question in mind. Why do we people act the way we do? Is it the best way to do things, or just the one we are used to? Julia, here we go.
Thank you, and thank everyone for coming. So apart from what has been said about recording and the microphone, I would also like to inform you that after his talk, Lorenzo is happy to take questions, and this can be done just by turning on your microphone and speaking, which is highly encouraged, by the way. Or if you prefer, just dropping a line in the group chat or writing anonymously on the Padlet link, which is available to you on the group chat currently. So now that the communications are over, I'm really happy to introduce to you Lorenzo Zandri, our third speaker for our lecture series. This episode is called Young Adult. Lorenzo Zandri is a photographer and artist currently based between London and Paris. He has an architectural background, and today he will tell us all about how his architectural education informs what he does. He will guide us through some of his commissioned as well as personal projects. And specifically, he will tell us how he went from building things to building images. Lorenzo collaborates with architectural practices and firms worldwide, and he shows us their projects through his lens. You've probably seen his work published on architectural magazines such as Domus, Dizine, or Divisare. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Lorenzo. Lorenzo, whenever you want to begin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for this very nice and very kind introduction and invitation. I'm really pleased to be here this evening. Sorry, I'm just changing the screen. Yeah, I'm very pleased to be here and to be invited from the University of Strathclyde and the 131 Society. So I'm gonna share very briefly my screen. Tonight I will talk about my research and my work that is around this topic, building an image. I'm gonna start with this quote from the American photographer August Sander that say that our eyes convey to us as a surface image of things around us, and the mind processes the viewed objects into ideas and creates an inner world that we interpret in the most varied ways. I think it's very important and crucial for me, this quote, not only because it represents in a certain sense my multi approach to see things, and I will explain more about that in my talk, but also because it's very fascinating for me how the mind processes the real objects and translate it into ideas or kind of how can I say, kind of meanings, let's say. I'm gonna share this image that I shot 2 years ago now. Is a sort of turning point to me concerning this topic. I shot this photo as a part of a long-term personal project that I'm doing close to my hometown in the countryside. And it's very interesting because when I published in an interview this image, I've had some feedbacks from my followers or my friends asking me, "Oh, what's this project? Is a construction site from a practice?" Which is, I mean, they were quite fascinated by this kind of atmosphere of this building, and in the reality, this is a very, I mean, kind of ugly building, and not very famous, very anonymous, and I also shared this image actually with my father, and he didn't recognize that, and this building is so close to our house in the countryside. So I was quite fascinated how, I mean, a common building for a common viewer can be perceived easily, or can be let's say misperceived. So I mean, I really like this the atmosphere on this image, because tells a bit more of a kind of an image that could be, or an architecture that could be, and it's not. So the lecture is divided in 6 topics tonight. So I'm gonna start from the first one, that is photography as an architectural tool. It's very important, this phase, because I'm trained, as Julia said, I trained as an architect between Rome and Paris, and I was always fascinated by photography as a field, but starting in architecture, I've been very fascinated by this kind of representation, for example, from Sebastiano Serlio. I really was into this building an image through a drawing, through an architectural drawing, and I was quite, let's say, into trying to find a meaning of the process that leads the construction of an image through this kind of medium. And I started to think about, for example, also this one from Franco Burrini. And I started to think why photography, in a certain sense, can be the same tool of a drawing or even if it's a sketch or a technical drawing. Why can photography represent an architectural truth, an architectural tool to let's say to present an idea, to present a project, to express a meaning, let's say. And when I found out the work by Gabriele Basilico, I discovered that I mean, even if I can be trained as an architect, I can say a meaning through an image, and it was very crucial, this kind of let's say meeting between me and Basilico, and I started to think about this quote by William Blake that says, "I see through my eyes, not with them," meaning that I can see, and I have to see not with the eyes, but through the tool of the eyes. So it's very tricky and very subtle, let's say, thought, because I started to think that photography would have been my tool. So I see through the medium of photography. So I can translate through photography to the camera the reality. And so I started to build my references of images, and building these references, I found out that were kind of related to the art and I mean to the painting sculpture, and I started actually to build my culture of images. That is it's a very deep, I think, topic, because it's every time it's very very ongoing, very processed way to find our own, let's say, references. And so I started to find out that I was inspired consciously, also subconsciously, from the art world. For example, I found out the painting from Atkinson Green Show after taking this picture. So it was very interesting to me how subconsciously I was inspired in a certain sense in the process of the photography, as well also from this one, Villa Farnesina in Rome by Giulio Romano. In a certain sense, shooting this space, I can find sort of relation with this painting from Tilman Petersen. And so I started to, in a certain sense, look to this culture that I was, this is in my inner world, let's say, and And I mean, it's very interesting, the process that it's developing in my research, because, for example, I recently found out that these engravings from Marius Bauer, it's inspired, I would say maybe better. Marius Bauer, generally speaking, I recently found out that he's inspired and by photography. So in the last 19th centuries and first years of the last century, he used to buy old photos to be inspired for his paintings, and I do the exact opposite. So I'm inspired by paintings. So it's kind of a tricky, interesting process. And there is another one comparison that I recently found out. And actually, this kind of relation between my references is not only for personal shots, but also for commission at once. So, for example, this project that I shot recently, almost actually 1 year ago in London by Arigoni Architects, I found out this kind of same atmosphere of the painting by Daniela Stone. Or, for example, this relation between the concept of a city expressed by Ludwig Hilbersheim compared to the new project that Lan Architecture has recently completed and has commissioned to shoot. So I'm gonna leave a bit this kind of relation to your. So the third part of the talk will lead into a very deep or very also provocative topic, that is building a project through the images. So I started to think about the fact that I was not interested to build things as an architect, as trained as an architect, but build images and projects through the images. And the first project that I consider a proper project is on the riverside. On the riverside is a visual research that I started actually 3 years ago now, and it aims at investigating different forms of relations between natural and man-made elements along the riverside of the Thames in London. So I was quite intrigued to investigate a bit, let's say, how the metropolis is evolving, is changing at the edge of the capital of London. So I decided to push myself to look at the edges of, geographically speaking, of London, between the inner and the outer London. And so I started this project. I was not sure actually what I was looking for actually. And when I shot this image, that was the first one that I properly considered starting image for on the riverside. I realized that as in the first image that I showed lately, also this kind of atmosphere of an anonymous or ongoing, or we can say also a bit ugly architecture is can create this atmosphere compared to the natural elements of things. And it was interesting because I found out that the themes was a sort of as Eric Desmarais called, a long winding snake. So a sort of a snake that can be my point of view to give a key of lecture of the city. So I started to investigate a bit at the border of from inner and outer London, making sketches and making notes, considerations on what I was looking at, like consideration and the differences between the east side compared to the west side. And I found out also, taking my painting references by my side. This is a series from Walter Steglitz from the East London group that made a sort of paintings on the river in the 20s and 30s years of the last century. So I started to compare infrastructures along the river, landmarks and gates, and also architecture, post-war architecture, very crucial example of housing architecture as Time Smith on the left and instead construction site on the right. And again, like completed 19th architecture facing the water and ongoing construction site. So eventually this series that pushed me very hard at the edges of London eventually has been selected by London Festival of Architecture in 2019, and I managed to make an exhibition with my images, and eventually I designed a bit exhibition layout, trying to like give a sort of like good match of the photos, also in relation of the place that actually was in London. It was on the canal, so was related to the water topic, let's say. So on the riverside was very interesting and I think it's a sort of ongoing project because I think about that also during this last year. But the following year, I finished in a certain sense on the riverside. I started this project, Lost and Found, and Lost and Found actually is the opposite approach of on the riverside, let's say, because I was looking into the city of London, so the oldest district of the capital, and I found out that in this district there are more than 100 churches, so very dense compared to, like, not densely speaking for the on the riverside. And I was fascinated by this kind of episode in the city, and so I made some researches, and some of these architecture functions have been changed during these years, some of the churches have been demolished due to great fire or due to the bombs of the World War. Have been rebuilt, have been converted, so different uses. But in a way, the shape of sort of churches will has been preserved and stand as a sort of beautiful, let's say, bastions in the continuous regeneration process. So I was like trying to compare the urban context with this kind of with this urban contemporary process with this old, I mean, shape, let's say, and it was very. I focused my research on some churches that I was, or some, let's say, religious traces that I was interested in, and I started to find, let's say, make main catalog or a sort of sampling around the city of these churches, starting to match in the same way, let's say, comparing the scale of this small episode, as I say, compared to the contest, or I mean, this kind of curious example and very infill, let's say, episode again. Or, for example, like, let's say, common shapes that we can find usually in the churches that now have been changed uses, like these two gardens. Or vertical landmarks that stand comparing to, again, this contemporary and ongoing regeneration process. And again, churches that try to melt or try to stand compare to the contemporary, or again, hold against old buildings. So the fourth chapter of this lecture to speak about the journey as a catalog of images. I've been lucky enough, let's say, before the first lockdown, to travel in February Mexico. So I've been lucky to experience a bit this country. It was, I mean, amazing because I got the chance to explore another country very different from the UK, especially Mexico City compared to London. This is a quote from Octavio Paz that speaks about La Ciudad de Mexico, and he says that there is a million, let's say, million city into this city. So during this journey, I try to look at analogies and associates different moments when I was a bit exploring the city and generally speaking the country of Mexico, because I moved a bit to the south, and I found out sort of feeling to be sometimes in a let's say in a path, in a common path. For example, this is the museum, sorry, and Jumex by Chipperfield, and this is the rest ancient ruins of Nipah. But I'd also looked at, a great architect that is Louis Barragan, and how the people live these places, and also finding tricky, let's say matches between natural pools and new empty pools, or gates, or very similar perspective of old buildings in Mexico, and again we start again. It's very interesting because visiting some architecture of Luis Barragan as Casa Studio on the left and Torres de Satellite on the right, I felt this very strange feeling that it's very hard to describe, let's say, this sensation to be into a world, an interior space, but to be in an inner world that can be open, and instead to be completely in a very open place as was the Torres de Satellite, but feeling in a sort of intricate and let's say deep world. And again, some kind of association that represent a very crucial, let's say, point of the architectural emotional concept by Luis Barragan, that the fact that he uses colors or blank walls to suggest the following space by layers. So I don't know if you can perceive, but it is kind of first layer of this space into this shot of Casa Studio on the left, and the pink wall right just at the end on the right shot, that is the Father San Cristobal by Luis Barragan. And again, this kind of sensation that I tried to describe before. It was very interesting to me, this topic, this kind of sensation of the space, the atmosphere of the space. Candida Offer, there is a photographer of the Soda Obscure, speaks about the personality of the space. So it's very interesting, this expression for me, and leads us to the next chapter of the talk, that is building an atmosphere. It's very hard to talk about this topic, so I'll try to use again a quote by Andrea De Carlo, that is an Italian writer, that it tells about. I will try to. I use the Italian quote, but I'll try to translate it. So, according to De Carlo, during this book, there is a journey actually in Mexico, Yucatan, and he speaks about landscapes that are apparently natural, that are full of a nostalgic, of shadow, of a kind of melancholic sensation, and instead there are some kind of landscape that are apparently limited, but built with like very with care from nothing. But even if they seem inhabited, they are very they transmit, they show a sort of calm and a peaceful emotion. So this kind of different sensation, I tried to translate, and I felt during my research, and I tried to translate during my work. For example, this is a personal series that I made actually again in Mexico. This is a sort of small old church in Yucatan. It seems to be very, very ugly, or in a certain sense abandoned. But when I came inside this building, I felt a deep moment of melancholy, and I try to translate this. I try to first of all embrace totally this sensation, and actually the film process, because I worked on this series on film, so the film helped me to translate this emotion. You can see probably from the grain of the image. So I felt in a certain sense very reassured, let's say, entering in this courtyard. And it was a sort of discovering again an inner world, as August Sander said, made by only shapes and spaces, layer of objects. And I use this kind of approach to the atmosphere of the space, to the personality of the space, not only on personal projects, but also on commissioning. And for example, when I shot this project by Arrigoni Architects near London, that is called Willow Road, I actually lived one day into the house, and I tried to, let's say, translate the personality of the space again, working on, let's say, special time frame of the day. As you can see, there were night, and try to work only with natural light, so embracing the natural motion of the space, starting a sort of dialogue, let's say, between the objects, a book, a chair, or a sheet. So the last chapter of this talk is a question. I usually pose questions during my work. I am not that good to answer to all of that. So I'll try to let's say find out a topic, try to translate in the image, but sometimes it's a question. And my question, can an image be a space? Regarding this question, I'd like to talk a bit more about one of my side projects that is called ROBOCOOP. ROBOCOOP is an experimental art duo project that I founded with my colleague, architect and friend during the university. So we started to, let's say, create urban and temporary installation in the streets using mainly ephemeral mediums, trying to recreate actually fictional or imaginary scenarios that matches art or paintings or frescoes references with the contemporary architectural world. And we created a sort of indoor installation as this one of now 5 years ago in Rome, or exterior installation that matches ephemeral possible architecture or possible spaces into the city, matching, for example, this scan detail from the library, Exeter Library, and the studio of San Girolamo by Antonello da Messina, or matching, in a certain sense, an environment that is an urban, complete environment, as this one in Italy. Creating imaginary spaces that are, in a certain sense, remodeled by us and recreated according to a focal point of view, as this one in Rome that we made 6 months ago. But talking about, can images be a space? I just want to share with you our last exhibition in Rome that we were lucky enough to open in September of 2020. So that is called Quadrature. Quadrature the name is inspired by a pictorial Gen born in the second half of the 16th century, which is consistent in a sort of architecture painted on walls that were fictional and recreating perspective in the illusionistic frameworks. So we found out that we were inspired subconsciously by an Italian, let's say, culture of images, as for example the Sala dei Palafrenieri or Villa Farnesina, again, as you've seen before. And in Quadrature, actually, very inspired by this approach, we were called to make an exhibition in a space in Rome called Divario, that is a completely white box, let's say, space. And we had the keys of the space, so we were free to do everything we want. And we were quite interested by the fact that the space that is located in a Roman ground floor, classic Roman ground floor space, has been like designed with this double weight. So considering this existing situation in the layout of the gallery, and inspired by the idea to bring a space through an image, we designed and also keeping references from, as we said, Sala de Perfinieri, or for example, Teatro di Vicenza, Teatro di Vicenza by Palladio. We try to create a one-to-one scale installation that we studied starting from the model of the space. So we made this render, and we found out that we wanted to create a 3D space using a 2D medium, and we create this. That is quite tricky because this is just a print, 2 layers of print. So in a certain sense, we created a space using a not material, let's say, not material print, and we designed the exhibition plan starting from that concept. Basically, we started to pose it to show the artworks created for the exhibition after the first layer of the installation. So as you can see, it's just a print that creates a fictional space, and all the artworks were related to this topic of the layers of the images that create fictional images, as for example this one, or in a certain sense also this triptych. And it was very interesting to us also the urban point of view of the installation, as a sort of frame, as a sort of urban frame into the frame, let's say. Thank you so much. This was the last project that I showed, and I really hope you enjoyed the talk, and I'm open to brief discussion.
Thank you so much for your talk. I'm sure all our guests enjoyed it as much as I did, at least. It was really interesting to get to know your photos, and even to get to know the process behind them, and an insight into your side project, ROBOCOOP. That was really inspiring. So I think we have a couple of questions lined up on the Padlet. I would like to ask you a question to begin with, just to break the ice. You've mentioned that architecture can influence photography, and perhaps even vice versa. And I don't know when you began taking photos, if you began as a student or if it was something that sort of came about later. But do you think that perhaps photography could be used even in sort of an educational environment, so in architecture school, as a means to better understand the space? Could it be something that maybe architecture schools could encourage in an architectural formation?
It's a very, very interesting question, and I think I just want to say that, starting from the last moment of the question, I truly do. Actually, yeah, I think we can put photography at the same level of a drawing, so can be inserted in an educational, let's say, path. I mean, is also kind of as drawings is also kind of a very personal, let's say, interest. So I mean, can be a tool to describe a project, can be a truthful tool, and instead talking about the relation to, generally speaking, maybe I missed a point that is very interesting to me, talking about the relation between architects or architecture and photographers and photography. Sometimes working with architects, it's very interesting because they tell me that through my images discovery, hidden or very I can say not found emotion or into their projects, and they told me that for example a photo has been very let's say very important and very for the next one, for the next project. So in a certain sense, also in the practice, in the architectural practice, I think it's a very important tool to take care of, let's say.
Yes, thank you for that answer. Does anyone else want to, I know there's a question in the group chat, or if anyone wants.
Oh, sorry. Can I ask you first a question? Sorry. Hi, Lorenzo. Thank you for your talk. It was really interesting, and for your pictures.
Thank you, Eduardo. Thank you.
I found it very fascinating when when you're at the beginning, you said how you got inspired by painting, because in a way it's kind of amusing how when photography was invented or create actually a problem for art that had to express itself in new ways, that it was not just painting reality. So I was wondering, I mean, you gave some examples, but do you think that as art, photography can express something different from what we see and can go farther than just reality? Because sometimes I feel that, just for myself, it's a limit to myself, but I don't know. What's your point? What's your opinion?
I mean, I think historically speaking, photography made a sort of clash into the artwork because it was bringing reality into into a representation, let's say. But I think that photography can be also a deep moment of reveal the hidden reality, let's say. And for that, I think that I mean you talk about limit of photography. I think for me the limit of photography is precious, is the precious thing, because we are forced to have a frame, have a ratio, have a sort of translation in something that it's not digital, of course, but is physical, but as a sort of frame, and this is helps to explore the meaning of the subject. So we have a limited thing that is the frame, that is a ratio, but we have an explored meaning with the meaning of the image itself. I don't know if I'm clear or not, but it's very interesting.
I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Completely agree also. Well, I can read a couple of questions maybe on the Padlet, unless anyone else wants to
There's
just
also
ask
a
them
few
personally.
in the comments.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there's a few in the comments. How do you approach a commission shooting? What are the steps? Do you visit the site before bringing the camera on it?
That's a very, very good question, because I spoke mostly about my personal project and not I didn't mention many of commissioned projects. Well, it's very important to me the relation with the architects before shooting. So I usually talk about is design process, is emotion during designing the project. So, for example, I'll make an example because maybe it's easy. I shoot recently a project, and the architect told me it's very important to me the fact that I designed this long corridor, and I truly designed to see a tree. I don't know how we call this species of tree in English, but anyway, I can see the tree into the garden. So he didn't mention like, oh, I just want a frame from this point of view. We need this one. We need that one. It speaks about kind of architectural design process. So it's really important to me to set the collaboration in this way, and I usually start to talk about references for practices. I don't know, architecture in general, and not about what photo they need. And and talking about, I think it was also about the sites. I usually don't visit the site, and I try to embrace, I mean, the experience at the first sight. But if the project is a bit large or complicated, I usually need a reche or a visit. So.
Great. Thank you for that. I think we have a couple of questions in the group chat again.
I think Kaliki was about to ask a question before, and sorry. If you are still.
Oh, it doesn't work. Okay, I can read Aliki's question. He says, hi, Lorenzo, thank you for all the amazing photos. My question is more of a general one. I was wondering if it was a hard transition from practicing architecture into recording it, and how did you manage it?
So to transition from practicing, well, it was very natural because I was interested also from the young age to photography and to image. So my approach as an architect, also during my studies, was very visual. I was used to translate in this sense my projects as an architectural student. So in a certain sense, I switched very easily to let's say to this kind of profession, and I managed to find my first clients that were my first collaborators as architects, and then spread a bit my research.
Thank you for that. I think we have, perhaps I'll read one of the questions on the Padlet. Someone asks, do you think the popularization of Instagram has impacted architectural photography negatively, or do you think more widespread exposure is beneficiary? So yeah, how has Instagram impacted your work in general?
That is a very interesting topic, actually, because I think, I mean, in a certain sense, Instagram helped, well, let's first bad things. I think Instagram brings to everybody the possibility to make and to talk about images, especially in architecture. But it's very, and also in a certain sense, created and creates also constantly a sort of a common aesthetic around the architectural image. So it's very it's very dangerous from this point of view. But from the positive way, I think add a bit to spread more different kind of point of view of the same project, for example, thanks to, I mean, the location use or whatever. And personally, I use Instagram really only to spread a bit my images, my projects, and I mean, in a certain sense, in a public auditorium. But that's it. I mean, I try to not be influenced because I think it's a bit dangerous, as I said.
Thank you. Let's see. Well, there's general comments in the group chat. Otherwise, somebody asks, how do you choose where the location of your next project is, whether it's London, Mexico, etc.?
Well, again, I'll try to let's say to look at. I mean, how can I say? Well, I try to look to the unbeaten and the underrated side of the city, generally speaking, in the urban views, and I always look at the beauty of places and buildings where sometimes a common way of beauty is not recognized. So my investigation, in a certain sense, try to investigate the built environment and how our city are naturally changing, but also like trying to not only document but also create fictional scenarios, as I said in the presentation. So it's very I look at this place in a very personal way, let's say.
Maybe we'll just have a couple of questions more. Somebody asks, do you sometimes miss the design process and building things?
Well, yeah, sometimes I miss this kind of side, and I'll try with ROBOCOOP. That is a project that I mentioned in the last chapter. I'll try to explore this kind of approach to design, as you've seen in the last installation we made. Try to explore a bit. How can I say, this temporary installation made of ephemeral architecture. So I'm really happy that, I mean, ROBOCOOP is a sort of side architectural project.
Great. Well, I think that was our last question for today. So unless anyone has some last words they want to say, we can wrap it up. And I want to thank everyone for coming today.
I have a last question, if you guys don't mind. Sorry for interrupting. How is the pandemic affecting your work and the way you see as a building or the built environment or even traveling?
Well, a lot, for sure, a lot, because traveling is part of my job, and I had postponed a lot of photo shoots, canceled, delayed, and I'm into that, of course. But I think it's we can do anything, and I mean I think it's part of the process, and I'll try. I mean, we in a certain sense, traveling now is. I managed to travel very, very rarely during the moment that I was allowed to travel in the last months, And I actually understood that during my job, I usually travel very fast, and I'll try to, what I learned from the pandemic, and I'll try to travel a bit slow, understanding a bit more the places that I'm going, not only to work, but to visit. So that's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So I would like to thank everyone who came today for their engagement and just for coming. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. I would also like to thank Lorenzo, obviously, for giving this brilliant and inspiring talk and
so
insight in his work, which was really appreciated. And lastly, I would like to thank the Architectural Society and specifically Fiona, Eduardo, and Elena, who made this all possible. If you guys enjoyed this episode of our series and are wondering or curious about our future episodes, you make sure to follow us on social media, Facebook and Instagram, and keep an eye out for our events. And we sincerely hope to see you there. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for coming, and have a good night.
Thank you very much, Lorenzo.
Thank you so much to everyone. Thank you.